Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Bible ABCs. What did you think it was going to be when you clicked on the link for this video? Not kittens, right? So let's get into our Bible lesson. I'm sure you are just wondering, what are we going to do for X? Stay tuned, because it's coming. But first, we have to roll through the alphabet, because that's how we learn. Alrighty, and the cool thing about today's lesson is that we're going to kind of tie it back to some things that we've already done. Believe it. Alright, so we started out A for Aaron, B for Bible, C for Christ, D David, E eyes, F 40, G for Galilee, and then we hit up the second row. H was for Hannah, I was for idols, J Joseph, K kindness, L lepers, M was for Mark. Today's lesson is going to be a little bit like Mark. N was for Nineveh. Then we rounded it out to the third row. O was for olives. P was for prayer. Q was for Queen Esther. R was for running. S was for Samson. T was for Trinity. U was for upper room. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. V was for vine. And then last week was W, and we talked about the wise man. And you guys can see here I drew the wise man's house on a rock, because that's what we want to be, wise men and women that build our house on the rock. So that brings us up to the final three. The countdown's on. X. Not a lot of words that begin with X, not only in the Bible, but in life. So what could we do? So I gave you guys a hint that last week we were going to use X not as our first letter, but as our second letter. And we're going to do a book of the Bible. So kind of the same way, like I mentioned, that we did Mark. So we are going to tackle the book of Exodus. Do you think we can do a whole Old Testament book with 40 plus chapters? I think there's 40 plus chapters. In one sitting? You bet we can. Hang on. Hang on to your siblings. Hang on to yourselves. Here we go. So Exodus, you guys know, is going to be in the Old Testament, and it's the second book of the Old Testament. So if you've been practicing your Bible books, hopefully you have. You know it rolls Genesis, Exodus, right? And then Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Do you want me to say them all? You betcha I can, guys. All right, so we're going to start with Exodus. And Exodus is really cool because it starts right where Genesis left off. So in Genesis, you guys remember, we have the story of Abraham and his son Isaac, and then Isaac had a son named Jacob, and then Jacob had a bunch of sons, one of which was Joseph, which we talked about when we did letter J, so that's going to be our first toss back to previous lessons. So we have these kind of biblical patriarchs, fathers in the Bible that are very, very popular. We know a lot about them and a lot about their story. And this is how it continues on in Exodus. So you guys remember that at the end of Genesis, Joseph was in Egypt, and so there was a famine, and all his brothers came to live with him because Pharaoh at that time really loved Joseph and wanted his family to be there. So at that time it was about 70 people, the Bible tells us, that of Joseph's family that came to live in Egypt. But you have so many years passing, and that family gets married, they have kids, they get a little bit bigger, and so you have a huge population of what are known as Israelites. That's the group of Joseph's and his brothers. That's all their family. And of course, with time, people pass away. So Joseph is no longer living. His father, Jacob, is no longer living as well. And so you just have this huge mass of people that are all living in Egypt that are not technically Egyptians, even though they're born there in Egypt. They're still considered kind of foreigners, right? And of course, nobody stays the leader forever. And so there's a new Pharaoh. And this new Pharaoh is noticing that there are so many Israelites, and that if things kind of started to turn, they might turn on him, right? So his solution is to make them into slaves. which is horrible, right? And so he sets out. So they were happy, all living in Egypt. Things were good. And then all of a sudden, now they're slaves. They're doing work without getting paid. They don't have any free time. They have to kind of follow someone else's rules, which is not cool. And God's watching this the whole time, and he can kind of feel their sadness. And so he's coming up with a plan to get them out of there, right? So then you guys know we have a sweet little baby in a basket, and this baby is going to be the main person in the book of Exodus, and it's Moses. So you guys, I know you know the story. Moses' sister watched him, and his mom put him in the river because Pharaoh disliked the Israelites so much that he wanted to kill all of the male children, which is horrible. So you guys can imagine what a kind of a mean, ruthless guy this Pharaoh was, that, you know, not only was he enslaving these people, but now he's killing their children. So he's a really bad dude. So, and you know that sweet little baby Moses goes all the way to Pharaoh's daughter, and that's kind of the catch of the story, that even though Pharaoh disliked the Israelites so much, he had one of the main Israelites in his house, and was raised there in the palace. So then, much later on, we have Moses growing up, and then God talks to him through a burning bush. And this is such a cool story because the Bible tells us, you know, when you think about something that is set on fire, it starts to disintegrate, but the bush didn't. It was just on fire, and it stayed intact. And so he tells Moses at this time that he has a job for him, and his job is to go back to Egypt, because at this time Moses was an adult. He wasn't there anymore. Go back to Egypt and get the Israelites out of there, and then he's going to have to face Pharaoh. All this stuff is going to happen. And at first Moses is like, no, thank you. I don't think this is for me. But God assures him that he's going to be with him. He even says, hey, you got your brother. And do you guys remember the brother's name? It's Aaron. So we tag all the way back to Aaron, back to the letter A. Oh my goodness, it's happening. And so you guys know what happens. Moses goes back to Egypt, and all the plagues start to happen. Now, at this time, too, the Bible tells us something really interesting about Pharaoh's heart, and that God is going to harden it. And so you might be thinking, oh, wait, that's not fair, because why is God controlling Pharaoh's heart? And it's really important to note kind of how that sort of sequence happens, because the plagues start, right? And you guys, if you remember, it's things like locusts that eat up all the plants. There's a bunch of frogs everywhere. Water turns to blood. I want to say the cows die, if I remember correctly. There's, locusts, gnats. It's pretty bad. It's really bad, all those plagues kind of coming at once. And in the beginning, Moses goes after each plague, and he's like, all right, you want to let us go now? And he's like, ho. Pharaoh's like, no way. I'm not letting all this free labor go. Too bad. So sad. And then the Bible says Pharaoh's heart was hardened. And it doesn't say that God had anything to do with it at that point. And I think that's important for us to recognize, is that Pharaoh was not a nice guy, right? His heart was already hardened. And I drew a little picture of it, which kind of looks like the Grinch a little bit. If you guys have seen the Grinch, and towards the end of the movie, the Grinch's heart grew 10 sizes that day. Well, Pharaoh hardened 10 sizes. So he was already a bad dude, already had a heart that was kind of stony, not very nice. And so God gave him opportunity after each plague, with Moses saying, you want to let us go now? It could all be over. Just let us out of your hair and we'll be done with this. But Pharaoh hunkered down and he said no each time. And so after several plagues, after several opportunities, God's like, well, he's not really turning, so I'm going to keep him and keep his bad attitude and use it to get my people out of there. And so the culmination, the very last plague that happens, kind of takes a note. God's going to take a note from what Pharaoh did, because Pharaoh was killing the Israelite boys. And so he's going to take, Moses says, we're going to lose the firstborn of all of Egypt. And so in order to, though, protect the Israelites, Moses tells them to put the blood of a lamb over their door, which for us, when we talked about the upper room and Jesus was eating Passover, here's our Passover, right? So the Spirit would pass over the houses with the blood, because that gave the signal that these are the people that are on the way out. These are God's people. And then subsequently took the babies from the other households. And you guys know Pharaoh loses his own son. And this is at the point where Pharaoh's like, get out, everybody out, leave, leave, leave. And so the Israelites are like, oh, bye. So they're out of there. So all this time, after all this slavery, this is where they leave. And this is why the book is called Exodus, because they are exiting, right? Exiting Egypt, right? Okay, and so you guys know what happens. They go to the Red Sea. Moses has his staff, it parts, and the Israelites are able to walk through on dry land. But then Pharaoh kind of has a change of heart, and he's like, oh no, I want to get them. And so he sends out all of his soldiers and a whole bunch of people to chase down the Israelites. And luckily, of course, God is with them. And so the Red Sea collapses on top of Pharaoh's people, and the Israelites get to go on. Now, here's what happens, though. At the end, this is the first 18 chapters. And so I put a little flag there to indicate we're kind of closing in on chapter 18. So picture it. The Israelites are in the wilderness. They're with Moses. They kind of have a plan. They're not sure of it. They're a little nervous. I mean, now they're like on their own. They were in this, major city, and here they are. And they kind of start to grumble. And they start to grumble. And they actually start saying things like, oh, if we could only be slaves in Egypt again. We had meat there. And now we're so hungry. And Moses just let us out here to die. So you kind of just want to say, like, guys, you're free. Just give it a second. Like, things are happening. God is with you. But they can only kind of see what's in front of them. So God provides for them. We have manna that'll come about. But it's a good point to kind of talk about how are the Israelites having a heart for God and a heart that is true? Or do they have a hardened heart? A little bit like someone over here, right? So this is important. And of course, your heart, kind of talking about it being reflective of your character and your attitude. So it's really important that the Israelites stay a people of God and stay those people that have an open heart and that are listening to what God says, and not fall and have a heart like Pharaoh, because then they're in trouble. That's no good. So then the next part of Exodus takes over. So again, the Exodus is going to be exiting Egypt. So now they're in the wilderness, and this is really cool. This is really fun as well. So we have Mount Sinai, and what happens is Moses is going to go up to Mount Sinai, and the Bible tells us that the Spirit of God, or God, comes down in a cloud form. So that's kind of cool that even though they can't really see, God's arms, his legs, his eyes, or anything like that. I don't know if he has those, but they have him there, his presence in cloud form, which is really cool to think about. So Moses goes up there. You guys know he's going to get the 10 Commandments, and then all the people are down there below. And Moses also gets the plans for a tabernacle. So this is really cool, because when you guys think back to the very beginning of Genesis with Adam and Eve, the Bible tells us that Adam would walk with God, which is really cool to imagine how that looked, and just to have kind of that close bodily proximity to God. But because of sin, that had stopped. And so this tabernacle, God talks about it being a way for him to come in and dwell among his people. So you can see God is really longing for that close relationship with us, and he is willing to do anything to try to get as close as he can, right, to his creation. And so he's telling Moses, this is what the tent will look like. This is how big I want it. These are the colors. These are the things that are going to go in it. And Moses is like, sounds pretty good. All the while, though, while this is happening, Moses has been up there for a while, because he's got commandments. He's hearing about the tabernacle, and the people are down there like, what is he doing? And they start to think, well, clearly he's never coming back. He's abandoned us. And they get Aaron, A for Aaron. They get Aaron to make a golden calf, so an idol, out of their jewelry and things, so that they can worship this calf and thank the idol for getting them out of Egypt. Does this make any sense at all? It doesn't. And they're violating the first 2 commandments of the 10 Commandments no gods before me and no idols. And they're like, okay, we'll do 2 of those. We're going to break 2 of those right off the bat. So this is tricky. So again, it kind of goes back. Oops, wrong way, Jay. Do we have a heart like this or a heart like this? Are we obeying God? Or are we kind of doing our own thing, Israelites? Kind of doing their own thing right now. But there's a way. So God sees all this happening and he gets really upset and he's like, why don't I just destroy them and start all over again? Because they're clearly not listening. We haven't even, we're barely into this and you guys are already on the struggle bus. And then Moses speaks on their behalf and he's like, what kind of God would you be if you did this? It's so important for you to stay with us, to fulfill your promise that you made through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So please don't destroy them. Please forgive them and we can move on. And then we get this cool verse in chapter 34 where God talks about the type of God that he is. And so he says, God speaking of himself, he says that he is a gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love, forgiveness, and he does not leave the guilty unpunished, and he punishes for sin. Because if he is a God who is loving, who is all about fairness, he can't tolerate sinfulness, and it will be punished. And so that's kind of the balance of that. And so God sides with Moses and decides to stick with those Israelites, commit to having them around. And so Moses goes down. They eventually build the temple, the tabernacle, the tent. They get all the specifics all together. And then the Bible talks about how the cloud comes down, the Spirit of God comes down and kind of rests above the tabernacle. And there was a part of the tabernacle that was the most sacred and where, the presence of God would be. And it talks about, how that actually happens, how the cloud comes down and that's going on. But then the book ends by telling us that Moses was not able to go in there. So he's done all this cool stuff, which is great, and he's followed God. He's, spoke with God through a burning bush. He's been on the mountain. We have 10 commandments. He was in a basket as a baby. So this is a lot about Moses, but it wasn't for him to go into that part of the tabernacle. And that's it. That's Exodus. We're doing Exodus. So that's how the book closes out. So many cool things, right? And again, I love kind of looking at it from kind of like a broad bird's eye view, because a lot of times when you read Exodus, you'll read a couple chapters here and there, but I love kind of looking at it in this way because we get to see it ding to dong and see so many important parts, even if we're not able to talk about them too deeply. But again, one of the big takeaways for me from Exodus was the idea, is Israel going to follow God and to obey the commandments? And sometimes it can feel, we might have talked about this before, how commandments and rules and things like that might feel like, all we are doing is following a bunch of rules. We can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. But the whole point of those rules and commandments is for God to create a people who are so special, so set apart from the rest of the world, because he wants the best for us and he wants us to fulfill that role. And one of the ways that we do that is by abstaining from some things, doing some things more, like loving our neighbor, that sort of thing. And so rather than it being something, commandments and rules being something that really restricts us, it really gives us the opportunity to stay kind of within the parameters of what God wants and to really love and to really obey, which is super cool. So then, after Exodus is Leviticus. And you guys know, too, we don't have a tabernacle at our church. We don't have a cloud with God in it. In the New Testament, God fulfills his promise to redeem us in a different way. He gives us Jesus, who dies on the cross for our sins. He's our Passover lamb. He's the perfect sacrifice. And that's how we're able to get closer to God, is through Jesus, and how important and essential he is for our life and for our salvation. So it's kind of cool to think about things that are going on in Exodus mirror what happens in the future with Jesus, which is really cool. I hope you guys enjoy Exodus. And there's so much more to the story. Moses has a sister that we didn't really talk about. We didn't go too much into, how they get the manna, that sort of thing, how they get water. So there's definitely other pieces in there that I kind of glossed over a little bit for the sake of time. But hope you guys enjoyed it. I love Exodus. I think it's so super cool. So now for your activity, I couldn't find one that I really wanted that I felt, because you could do a burning bush, you could do, put Moses in a baby basket. There were a lot of activities that were just kind of one note, but I wanted us to do something that kind of encompassed all of Exodus. So you have kind of like a fill it out worksheet. So we have Exodus at the top. And so I want you to draw the scariest plague, whichever one you think is the scariest. Maybe it's the one with water turning to blood. Maybe it's flies, locusts, frogs. Could have been frogs. They're cute, but you don't want them everywhere. So draw the scariest plague. Write the number of how many commandments there were. That's an easy one. Add fire to the burning bush, because we talked about that a little bit. Finish Moses. So I drew kind of a body and a rod or staff for Moses, but draw his face. What do you picture it might look like? Maybe he had facial hair. Maybe he had a funny tooth. Don't draw a funny tooth. And then I wrote here, describe Moses. We talked a lot about him. Do you think he was a brave guy? Do you think he was a loving person? Do you think he was scared? Think of some words to describe Moses based on what you know and what we talked about in Exodus. And then draw water coming from a rock. So I drew a rock here, so just draw water coming from it. Again, we didn't talk about that one too much, but I know you can draw it and picture what that would look like. Draw a cloud of God above the tent, right? Above the tabernacle. What would have that look like? Maybe it's going to be big and fluffy. Maybe it's going to have some, lines coming down. Picture what it might have looked like and create it yourself. And then here, what color should the heart of Israel be? Are we picturing a black hardened heart like Pharaoh had? Or should they have a heart of love, nice and red and open for God to dwell in? So you guys fill that out, enjoy, and yeah, we did X this week, so that means we only have Y and Z left. Y is a little tricky. Not sure what we're going to do for that one. There was a couple of good Y words from the Bible, but I don't know if we can make a whole lesson out of them. We'll see. I'll come up with something. It'll be fine. Don't worry. Don't cry. I'll take care of it. And then Z. Z is after Y, so we'll tackle that in 2 weeks. And then that'll be it for our Bible ABCs. We'll have rocked the alphabet. We'll have plunged into the Bible, deep dive, Old Testament, New Testament, all kinds of good stuff. So look forward to seeing you guys next week. And I hope you come to the Bible class tonight at 4:30 and hang out. I believe Perry and Kathy are in charge of it. So always fun to be with them and learn from them. So hope you enjoy yourselves, and I will see you next week. We will take on Y. Bye, guys.